Hi everyone, Brenda Gustin here, and we're still on talking about microbial nutrition and growth. And in particular, we're going to talk a little about viruses. A lot of what we've been talking about already has been talking about bacteria, but in this section, we're going to talk about viruses. And viruses, remember, are much different than bacteria. They need a host in which to multiply. And so I wanted to talk about how do viruses multiply. And there's a nice diagram here, and it talks about the five steps that viruses take. Now, if you read this whole chapter, you would see that there's a lot of variations on this theme, and lots of different viruses do it slightly different. But this is a very generalized idea, generalized concept to give you just an idea of what viruses do generally. So, here we go, the life cycle of animal viruses. These are viruses that infect animal cells, and it's similar in other cells too. A virus is going to adsorb. Adsorb means to attach to a surface. It's going to penetrate. It's going to go into the host cell. It's going to uncoat. Remember that the virus has a capsid protein coat around its nucleic acid, so it has to take off that protein coat. Synthesis, it's going to make viral parts. Those parts are going to be assembled into new viruses, and those viruses are going to be released. So let's look through that in the diagram. So here's the host cell, and I'm going to actually enlarge this a little bit and go over each one of these sections. So here's your host cell, here's your animal cell. And remember, we have cytoplasmic membranes or cell membranes on the outside of cells. And so the first step we say is adsorption. Here's the virus, and this happens to be an enveloped virus with spikes. And there must be some kind of protein receptors. There's proteins on the surface of all cells. And so there's some special proteins on the surface of this cell that this virus recognizes, and it can stick to them or adsorb to them. Now, remember that viruses can be very specific as to what cells they attach to. Rhinoviruses, some of the viruses that cause colds, only attach to the cells in the upper respiratory tract, in the nasal cavity, because those cells have the appropriate receptors. Coronaviruses, like the SARS-CoV-2 that we're just getting over with our COVID-19 epidemic, attach to cells in the lower respiratory tract infection. And what makes those viruses specific for those unique cells are the particular proteins or receptors on the surface of the host cells. So in this example, they're showing you that this virus actually goes inside of the host cell. And you can see that cell membrane is kind of pinching in, and it's going to pinch off and allow this virus to come in. Now, not all viruses enter cells. Some viruses can actually stay on the surface and inject their DNA or their RNA. But in this example, they're showing you how the virus goes into the host cell. Now, once the virus is inside the host cell, there's no need for the envelope and the capsid. So they kind of disintegrate, and all you need is the DNA or the RNA. In this example, they're showing you that this virus is an RNA virus, and that's the instructions on how to make new viruses. Now remember that viruses don't have the stuff to make new viruses. They don't have ribosomes and energy generating metabolism, but they're going to use the ATP and the ribosomes and the precursors that belong to this host cell. This is where we were talking about how viruses kind of act like the kid living in their parents' house. So they can use all the belongings of this cell or of their parents and multiply just fine. So we have this stage that we're calling synthesis, and so the viral DNA or RNA is going to use the host cell parts to make virus parts, and that's what this step is. So the directions on how to make the virus is in the viral DNA or the RNA, and here's some of the parts that cell's gonna that virus is making with the help of the host cell. So we need a step where we're going to put all those virus parts together. We call that assembly. So now you've made all the various parts of the virus and you assemble them into the RNA inside, the protein coat, the spikes, and then finally release. And because this virus is an enveloped virus, it's going to go to the cell membrane. It's going to pinch off a piece of the cell membrane and surround itself, and it's going to leave that cell. Now, not all cells do that. If you're a naked virus, one that doesn't have an envelope, the virions, the virus particles, can multiply inside the host cell and then just kind of blow up the host cell. And it can actually break open the host cell and damage it. But the virus particles or the virions can be released that way. So release might be through leaving by pinching off some of the membrane if you're an enveloped virus, or just lysing or breaking open the host cell if you're not. The textbook goes into some of that detail that I just told you about, so you can review that. That's the information I was talking about. This is just a closer picture of step one, where we have adsorption, where here's the virus. These spike proteins are attaching to receptor proteins, proteins on the host membrane. Let's see. There's some details on penetration, synthesis of the viral parts, putting all the parts together, assembly, and then release. And they go into some more detail about releasing. This is an electron microscope picture that's been colored using a computer, but here's a host cell, and here's some HIV virus that are pinching out, and they must be enveloped viruses because they can pinch out, they can surround themselves with some of the host membrane. Thought this picture was kind of interesting. A technician working with viruses. Now he must be working with something pretty dangerous, because look at this. He's got completely covered, no breaks between his any parts of his uniform, and here he has even oxygen coming in to. He's not even breathing the air, so he must be working with something kind of dangerous. If I go down here, here's a question that's asking about genital herpes, and I think when we go through this, you will get that information. Here we have the concept of a persistent infection. In your notes, in your lecture study guide, I ask you to distinguish between a persistent infection and a chronic latent state, or what we would call a latent infection or latent virus. There's a couple of things that viruses can do. So when we looked at that life cycle, the virus can go in the cell, it can multiply, and it can release. And a lot of the infections, viral infections we get, that's what happens. You know, you get exposed to a cold virus, it multiplies in your cells, it releases, infects other cells, and it can spread. But some viruses can do what we call a persistent infection. And what that means is the virus stays active in your cells. And so it can be shedding. Here it says it can kill host cells, but some cells will have a carrier relationship where the virus is not, where the host cell is not immediately broken open. So you have this persistent infection. It says it can last a few weeks or the remainder of the host's life, depending on the virus. One of the common viruses that do this is the measles virus. Now, you remember when we were talking about COVID, and we said, well, most people that get COVID don't get very sick. So, you can get COVID, or a lot of people that get COVID don't get very sick. You get COVID, you get better. Why are we so worried about it? Why don't we just let everybody get it? Because a small percentage of people actually will have complications or potentially die from it. Measles is kind of the same way, and if everybody's getting sick, a small percentage of people can turn out to be a lot of people. Measles is the same way. That measles can be, again, a disease that's not that serious. You might feel lousy for a week, but you'll get better and you'll be fine. But a small percentage of people can get encephalitis from measles and have permanent damage or suffer from death. The people that get encephalitis have what we call this persistent infection, where the measles virus actually gets into the brain tissue, causes inflammation, can result in blindness, deafness, brain damage, and death. So it can be a very serious disease. So it's really important that people get measles vaccines. If you get measles, you might be lucky enough to get better quickly, which most people do. But again, a certain percentage of people, the measles virus goes into this persistent infection. There's another kind of infection where we call it a latent virus, or you might say the virus is in a chronic latent state. In the situation where the virus goes in a chronic latent state, I'm going to go back to that original picture. Here we have the virus making its synthesizing its nucleic acid. And so what can happen is some of the DNA from the virus can actually go into the host cell nucleus and incorporate itself into the genes of our chromosomes, into our chromosomes. So you don't have free virus like you would with the persistent infection. You actually only have some of the viral DNA, but that's enough information to make new virus at a later date. So when someone has a chronic latent infection, or we would just say they're infected with a latent virus, that means the viral DNA is incorporated into our host chromosomes. Now, if you look at any human cell and you can study the chromosomes in any one of our cells, you'll find a lot of viral DNA that has been incorporated into our cells and actually can even pass from generation to generation. If you're infected with certain pathogens, and one virus that does this frequently is the herpes virus. And so herpes viruses, and I'm going to give you examples of two herpes viruses. One of them is the herpes simplex virus, which causes cold sores and genital herpes. People that get cold sores and genital herpes can get sores that just appear periodically. And the kinds of things that might make those sores appear are things like stress. Some people, when they're exposed to sunlight, other people, when they get sick. Anything that depresses your immune system or stimulates that viral DNA to come out of your chromosomes and start making virus again can cause a reoccurrence of disease. So what happens is when you get these herpes viruses, they actually go into your nerves. And I'm going to show you a picture of that. I'm going to move forward into chapter 16 right now. So I'm in chapter 16, section 16.3. And here's a picture of what we call, it's somebody's back, and it's showing you, here's their spinal cord underneath all these muscles, and here's the nerves that are branching off of it. When you get these latent herpes viruses, what they do is they end up residing in what we call the neuron cell bodies, also known as ganglia, at the base of the nerves. And so at the base of your nerves, you have these cells along your spinal cord where herpes viruses can stay. So if you get a cold sore, it means that herpes virus is it's in a latent state at the base of one of these neurons. I get cold sores once in a while, and they're always in the exact same place. And that's because there must be a neuron that I have a latent herpes virus in there. And when I get stressed, it activates and I can start feeling it developing at the end of the nerve. And you can get a sore called we call them a cold sore. That's the herpes virus in active latent state. These are really common. About 30% of people or more carry this virus. Same thing with genital herpes. They're different herpes viruses, but they're in neurons. Those viruses are in a latent state in the neurons, and they can be triggered and activate. The other virus that does this that you're probably familiar with is the one that causes chickenpox. So there's somebody with chickenpox, and the book says they give you the name. They say herpes zoster virus. Well, it's actually a herpes virus, which is a broader group, and it's called the varicella zoster virus. Causes chickenpox, and so people of my generation didn't have chickenpox vaccines. We all got chickenpox, and what happens to that chickenpox virus is it goes back into your nerves and resides in the base of your nerves, just like those cold sore viruses. And so again, somebody who's had chickenpox and recovered from it will have latent virus in the base of your nerves, in the cells in the bases of your nerves. And if they are activated, which can happen decades later, in fact, it doesn't usually happen until people get older, 50, 60, 70 or above. Under a stressful situation, they get something we call shingles. So chickenpox and shingles are the same disease, are the same, caused by the same virus. Chickenpox is the active varicella zoster virus, and shingles is caused by the latent virus becoming activated. One thing you would know if you had shingles is the rash doesn't come out all over your body. It comes out in lines. See, look at how this is like a line of a rash going across this person's torso. And it's because that rash is that virus is being activated in a nerve. So that nerve is putting out virus, and it's going to be along that nerve on your skin where you see the activation. And this can happen over and over again. Now, you've probably, most of you have probably not had chickenpox because you had a chickenpox chickenpox vaccine, which also means you're probably never going to get shingles. But people my age do get shingles vaccines, and they're just a super potent chickenpox vaccine. Here I am back in section 5.3, and I just wanted to mention the concept of how viruses actually can cause cancer. And it says experts estimate that about 13% of human cancers are caused by viruses. I've even heard higher numbers than that. But a virus that can cause cancer is called an oncogenic virus. Think about your oncologist. Hopefully you don't have an oncologist, but you've heard of an oncologist. That's a doctor that deals with cancer. So oncogenic viruses are viruses that can cause cancer. You might also hear them called oncoviruses. And the ones that you have probably heard the most about, one of the big ones, genital warts, is caused by the human papillomavirus. And that's an oncovirus. The reason why women get those pap smears every year is because some of the viruses that cause genital warts cause almost all the cervical cancer. And that's what the pap smear is looking for. What physicians are doing now is some of those doctors are recommending that we no longer do pap smears. They just recommend screening for HPV, the human papillomavirus. And if you don't have that virus, you're not going to get cancer from it. So cervical cancer is caused by the HPV virus that causes genital warts. There's some other viruses that are related to cancers. They have some listed here. Another one that you might hear a lot about, hepatitis viruses. Some of them can cause liver cancer. And in fact, almost all liver cancer is caused by hepatitis virus. So again, this is one that a lot of people get a vaccine for. And it's important to get rid of hepatitis virus if you find out that you're infected or get it, be in the care of a physician. So there definitely are viruses that cause cancer and even other diseases. I said there's probably an implication, something with multiple sclerosis and possibly the Epstein-Barr virus. So we have a lot to learn about viruses and cancers, but we know that this is a really serious thing. One of the tricky things about it is when you get infected with the virus, the cancer might not occur for many years. So it doesn't mean if you have an infection with the virus, cancer-causing virus, that you will get virus, or that you will get you will get cancer, or you will get it anytime soon. So the last thing I wanted to mention while we're talking about viruses and how they grow is just one vocabulary word. I wanted to remind you that all cells are able to get viral infections, and even bacteria. And they talk about bacteria viruses called bacteriophage. Bacteriophage are viruses that actually infect bacteria. A lot of what we know about how viruses multiply, we learned in bacteriophage by studying bacteriophage and bacteria. At that point, I'm going to stop.